The giant ship was a craft to amaze her heart. It rose above her, dominating the sky as her sight rushed to take it in, while its master, Grimmin Honensgrave, shouted orders from the wheel deck which stood high above over the vessel's heel, and giants swarmed its rigging to furl the canvas and secure the lines. It coasted into its berth with deft accuracy. The skill of its crew and the cunning of its construction defied the massive tan and moor granite of which it was made. Seen from nearby, the sheer weight of the Drummond's seamless sides and masts disguised the swiftness of its shape, the long sweep of the decks, the jaunty angle of the prow, the just balance of the spars. But just when her perception suggested to the scale of the ship, she could see that it was apt for giants. Their size attained a proper dimension among the shrouds, and the more of the stone sides rose from the water like flames of granite eagerness. That stone surprised Linden. Instinctively, she had questioned the nature of the giant ship, believing that granite would be too brittle to withstand the stress of the sea. But as her vision sprang into the ship, she saw her error. This granite had the slight but necessary flexibility of bone. Its vitality went beyond the limitations of stone, and that vitality shone through the Drummond's crew. They were giants, but on their ship they were more than that. They were the articulation and service of a brave and breathing organism, the hands and laughter of a life which exalted them. Together, the stone and the giants gave Starfare's gem the look of a vessel which contended against the powerful seas simply because no other test could match its native exaltation. Its three masts, rising each high enough to carry 3 sails, aspired like cedars over the wheel deck, where Honensgrave stood. He lolled slightly with the faint unevenness of the sea, as if he had been born with combers underfoot, salt in his beard, mastery in every glance of his cavernous eyes. His shout in answer to Pitchwife's hail echoed off the face of Coersee, making the Greve resound with welcome for the first time in many centuries. Then the sunlight and the ship blurred before Linden as sudden tears filled her eyes as if she had never seen joy before. After a moment, she blinked her sight clear and looked again at Covenant. Tautness had twisted his face into a grin like a contortion, but the spirit behind that grimace was clear to her. He was looking at his means to achieve his quest for the one tree, for the survival of the land, and more than that, he was looking at the giants, the kindred of Saltheart Foamfollower, whom he had loved. She did not need him to explain the desire and fear which had caused his grin to look so much like a snarl. His former victory over Lord Fowl had been cleansed of despite by the personal anodyne of Foamfollower's laughter, and the cost of that victory had been the giant's life. Covenant now regarded the giants of Starfare's gem with yearning and memory. He feared he would bring them to Foamfollower's fate. That also Linden understood. Like his obduracy, her own stubbornness had been born in loss and guilt. She knew what it had meant to distrust the consequences of her desires. But the arrival of the giant ship demanded her attention. Noise bubbled out of the vessel like the froth of gaiety. Hawsers were thrown to Pitchwife and Sea Dreamer, who snubbed them taut to the long unused belaying ports of the pier. Starfare's gem rubbed its shoulders against the sides of the levee, settled itself at rest. And as soon as the Drummond had been secured, the master and his crew of 20 giants swung down ropes and ladders, bounding to the piers. There they saluted the first with affection, hugged Sea Dreamer, shouted their pleasure at Pitchwife. The first returned their respects gravely. With her iron hair and her broadsword, she held their familiarity at a distance, but Pitchwife expressed enough mirth to compensate for Sea Dreamer's mute resignation. And shortly, the giants began to roil forward to look at the city of the unhomed, their ancient lost kindred. Linden found herself surrounded by weathered, brawny men and women twice her height. Sailors built like oaks, and yet as full of movement and wonder as saplings. All of them were plainly dressed in the habiliments of their work, in sarks of mail formed of interlocking stone discs and heavy leather leggings. But nothing else about them was drab. They were colorful in language and exuberance and salt humor. With a swirl of activity, they restored life to the grieve. Their impulse to explore the city, investigate the handiwork of their long-dead people, was palpable to Lyndon, and Covenant's eyes shone in response. A recollection of the Camorra by which he had redeemed Quercy from anguish, earning the title the first had given him, Giant Friend. But through the tumult, monolithic jests and laughter to which Pitchwife riposted gleefully, questions that the Haruchai answered with characteristic tersity, salutations which dazzled Lyndon and made Covenant straighten his back as if he sought to be taller. The first addressed Honensgrave sternly, telling him of her decision to aid Covenant's quest, and she spoke of urgency, of the growing chancer of the Sunbane, and of the difficulty of locating the one tree, creating a new staff of law in time to prevent the Sunbane from tearing the heart out of the earth. The master's excitement sobered rapidly. When she asked about the state of the giant's ship's supplies, he replied that the anchor master, his second in command, had reprovisioned the Drummond while waiting off the littoral of the Great Swamp. Then he began calling his crew back to the ship. Several of the giants protested good-naturedly, asking for the story of the grieve, but Covenant was nodding to himself as if he were thinking of the way the clave had fed the bane fire and the sunbane with blood. Honensgrave did not hesitate. "Patience, sluggards," he responded. "Are you giants that a little patience eludes you? Let stories await their turn, to ease the labor of the seas. The first requires haste." His command gave Lyndon a pang of regret. The ebullience of these giants was the happiest thing she had seen in a long time, and she thought that perhaps Covenant might want a chance to savor what he had achieved here. But she understood him well enough to know that he would not accept honor for himself without persuasion. Moving closer to him, she thrust her voice through the clamor. "Beric found the one tree, and he didn't have any giants to help him. How far away can it be?" He did not look at her. The Drummond held his gaze. Under his beard, he chewed a mood which was half excitement, half trepidation. "Sunder and Halion will do everything they can," she went on, "and those Haruchai you freed aren't going to sit on their hands. The clave is already in trouble. We can afford a little time." His eyes did not shift, but she felt his attention turned toward her. "Tell me," he murmured, barely audible through the interchanges of the giants. They and the Haruchai had ranged themselves expectantly along the pier. "Do you think I should have destroyed the clave while I had the chance?" The question struck a nerve in her. It resembled too closely another question he would have asked if he had known enough about her. "Some infections have to be cut out," she replied severely. "If you don't kill the disease somehow, you lose the patient. Do you think those fingers of yours were cut off out of spite?" His brows flinched. He regarded her as if she had startled him out of his personal concerns, which made him aware of her in a way which would not allow peace between them. The muscles of his throat were tight as he asked, "Is that what you would have done?" She could not keep from wincing. Gibbon had said to her, "You've committed murder. Are you not evil?" Suddenly, she felt sure that Covenant would have agreed with the raver. Fighting to conceal her self-betrayal, she answered, "Yes. Why else do you have all that power?" She already knew too well how much she wanted power. Not for that. Around them, the giants had fallen silent, waiting for his decision. In the unanticipated quiet, his vehemence rang out like a promise over the lapping of the sea. But he ignored his audience. Facing Lyndon squarely, he articulated, "I've already killed 21 of them. I'm going to find some other answer." She thought he would go on, but a moment later he seemed to see and recognize her abashment, though he could not have known its cause. At once he turned to the first. Softly he said, "I'd feel better if we got started." She nodded, but did not move. Instead, she drew her falchion gripping it in both hands like a salute. "Giant friend," she spoke. As she spoke, there was a shout in her words, though her voice was quiet. "To all our people you have given a gift which we will repay. This I say in the name of the search and of the Earth Sight." She glanced at Sea Dreamer, "which guides us still, though I have chosen another path to the same goal." Sea Dreamer's face nodded around the white scar running under his eyes across the bridge of his nose, but he permitted himself to show no protest. The first concluded, "Covenant giant friend, we are yours while your purpose holds." Covenant remained silent, a man tangled in gratitude and self-doubt, but he bowed his head to the leader of the search. The gesture touched Linden. It became him, as if he had found himself the grace, or perhaps the sense of worth, to accept help. But at the same time she was relieved to escape the hidden conflicts which had surfaced in his questions. When the first said firmly, "Let us sail," Linden followed the giants without hesitation towards Starfare's gem. The side of the giant ship leaned hugely over her, and when she set her hands and feet to the heavy thews of the rope ladder which the crew held for her, the ascent seemed to carry her surprisingly high, as if the vessel were even larger than it appeared to be. But Kale climbed protectively behind her, and giants surged upward on all sides. As she stooped through the railing onto the foredeck, she forgot her discomfiture. The Drummond reached out to her like an entrancement. Unaccustomed to such stone, she could not extend her percipience very far around her, but all the granite within her range felt as vital as living wood. She half expected to taste sap flowing beneath the surfaces of the giant ship, and that sensation intensified as her companions boarded the craft. Because of his vertigo in his half hand, Covenant had difficulty climbing, but Bryn soon helped him past the rail. Following either Covenant or Linden, Vane smoothly ascended the ladder, then stopped like a statue at the edge of the foredeck, smiling his black, ambiguous smile. Seer and Hergrim appeared to flow up the ropes, and as every set of feet took hold of the stone, Starfare's gem radiated more bustling energy to Linden's nerves. Even through her shoes, the granite felt too buoyant to be overborne by any sea. Sunlight covered the piers, spangled the gently heaving ship of water along the ship's side, shone into the face of Coercy as if this day marked the first true dawn since the destruction of the unhomed. Responding to Honensgrave's commands, some of the giants positioned themselves to release the moorings. Others leaped into the rigging, climbing the heavy cables as lightly as children. Still, others went below, where Linden could feel them tending to the inner life of the ship until they passed beyond her inexperienced perceptions. In moments, the lower sails began to ripple in the breeze, and Starfare's gem eased out to sea.